Imagine you're scrolling through a vintage film channel when you spot a documentary teasing the life of Henry Fonda, that quiet giant with the piercing eyes and a voice tinged by the American heartland. You pause thinking, Henry Fonda? Didn't he define the heroic everyman in classics like The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men? Absolutely. But behind that noble screen presence and calm smile lay a storm of personal drama. 4, eventually 5 marriages, an early anti-war stance that nearly doomed him in a patriotic era, a feud that spiraled into a fistfight with a legendary director, heartbreaking family distances, and the final emotional reunion that arrived almost too late. Born in Grand Island, Nebraska, on May 16, 1905, Henry James Fonda entered life beneath wide Midwestern skies. His father was a printer turned businessman, and young Henry was shy to the point of seeming aloof. This unassuming boy, with looks and a certain quiet intensity, might have drifted into a small-town existence, if not for an accidental detour. As a teenager, he witnessed a lynching in Omaha and was so disturbed that he began questioning authority, morality, and the social justice system. Perhaps those questions shaped the measured moral presence we'd later see in his movies. Yet in his youth, Henry never dreamed of stardom. He stumbled into acting through local theater, realized it captivated him in ways nothing else did, and soon packed up for the East Coast stage scene. By the early 1930s, he was on a collision course with Hollywood. Now let's turn the spotlight on to 1931. Fonda was a young actor in New York, bridging the line between Broadway and whatever film opportunities arose. And then, in a step that would become a hallmark of his life, he married. His first wife was none other than Margaret Sullivan, an up-and-coming stage actress with a luminous presence. On paper, they seemed perfect, both driven, talented, with a certain intangible magnetism. But personal chemistry sometimes plays out differently than we expect. Sullivan was fiery, emotional, while Fonda was famously reserved. Friends recalled that in disagreements, Sullivan would demand real engagement, only for Fonda to go silent. His jaw set in that expression he later perfected on screen. The union fractured almost before it began, lasting only 2 years. The heartbreak didn't generate major headlines. These were still early days in Fonda's career, but it foreshadowed a pattern that would repeat: a serious, introspective man who struggled to meet the emotional demands of those close to him. Fast forward 5 years, and Fonda tried marriage again, this time to Frances Seymour Brokaw, a wealthy socialite who radiated grace and a patrician style. The wedding took place in 1936, just as Hollywood started paying serious attention to Henry Fonda. By now, he'd gained notice through movies like The Farmer Takes a Wife, 1935, and was forging a path as a leading man who was neither flamboyant nor conventionally macho, but quietly authentic. Frances and Henry presented themselves as a classic, refined couple. The media wrote glowing pieces about how her upper-class composure and his Nebraska sincerity made for a perfect match. Within a year, Frances gave birth to a daughter, Jane, 1937, and then a son, Peter, 1940. To the outside world, the Fondas epitomized an elegant, contented family. Henry Fonda was on the cusp of mainstream fame, especially after landing roles that set him apart as a voice of reason in tumultuous times. Yet ironically, that was also the moment Henry Fonda revealed an inclination that baffled 1940s America: an anti-war stance. The late 1930s and early 1940s were tense, overshadowed by the rise of totalitarian regimes in Europe. Some in Hollywood were ardently isolationist, some anti-fascist. Fonda, shaped by that compassion and sense of moral justice we see in his roles, felt torn. He abhorred war. He'd read accounts of the Spanish Civil War, recognized the horrors it inflicted upon innocent lives, and expressed personal reservations about America leaping into another global conflict. A few gossip columnists labeled him unpatriotic, even a coward. Then the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened in December 1941, shifting the entire nation's stance. Fonda, determined to do his part, enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1942. He served as a quartermaster on the USS Satterley, and later did service in the air combat intelligence sector. His valor earned him a Bronze Star. Still, rumors persisted. Was he just making up for earlier anti-war sentiments? The result was a mix of admiration and side-eye. Some praised him for serving, while others never fully forgave his initial caution. He came back from the war, a decorated veteran, yet that moral tension, the difference between a deeply rooted personal pacifism and the war hero image demanded by Hollywood, lingered. It defined him in ways that clashed behind the scenes and shaped how directors used him in heroic patriotic roles like in Fort Apache, 1948, or Mr. Roberts, 1955. Speaking of Mr. Roberts, let's discuss the infamous 1948 feud with John Ford. Fonda was a stage actor at heart, so in between films, he jumped at the chance to star in a Broadway production of that comedic war story, Mr. Roberts, playing the titular role. It was a massive hit, with critics praising Fonda's portrayal of a junior officer exasperated by incompetent authority. John Ford, the legendary director behind Stagecoach, 1939, and The Grapes of Wrath, 1940, decided to direct the film adaptation. Everyone expected an epic synergy, the stoic Fonda, the iconic Ford, reuniting for a surefire classic. But behind the scenes, tension brewed. Fonda had lived with the character of Mr. Roberts on stage, while Ford had his own cinematic vision. They butted heads over line readings, pacing, character interpretation. According to on-set whispers, the arguments escalated until Ford socked Fonda in the face, an event that left the entire crew stunned. Hollywood insiders reeled at the news that these longtime collaborators, responsible for The Grapes of Wrath's emotional depth, had turned to violence. The project concluded with Fonda deeply resentful and Ford wounded in pride and physically unwell. Mr. Roberts was ultimately finished and partly directed by Mervyn LeRoy after Ford left for health reasons. But the friendship never recovered. For a time, the feud overshadowed the film's success. Reporters hounded them for details, and the betrayal weighed heavily on Fonda, who up to that point had considered Ford a paternal figure. The incident cast a lingering gloom over both men's legacies in the 1950s. But if you think an onset punch is dramatic, consider the personal tragedy that landed in Fonda's life in April 1950. By then, he and Frances Seymour had drifted far apart. Fonda had embarked on an affair with a much younger actress, Susan Blanchard. He asked Frances for a divorce. Devastated, struggling with mental health issues, Frances checked into a psychiatric facility in Beacon, New York. On April 14, 1950, she took her own life. The news shocked Hollywood. Fonda, desperate to shield his children from the ugly truth, told Jane and Peter that their mother died of a heart ailment. He kept the suicide a secret for years, perhaps believing he was protecting them from guilt or sorrow, or simply running from the shame and self-blame. In time, though, the children learned the truth and felt betrayed. That lie scarred the father-children relationship forever. It's a chilling example of Fonda's conflict-avoidant nature. When faced with crisis, he'd withdraw, put on a stoic mask, and bury the emotional fallout. But burying pain rarely solves it. The scandal didn't end there. Only 5 months after Frances's death, on December 28, 1950, Henry Fonda married Susan Blanchard. Many found this move shockingly callous. He'd barely finalized details of the funeral and estate when he marched down the aisle again. Family members, even close friends, recoiled. The press sniffed gossip about the vulnerable widower exploited by a younger starlet. In truth, it seems Fonda had orchestrated the entire situation, determined to escape a painful marriage and leap into a new beginning. The marriage to Blanchard lasted only until 1956, though, leading to a barrage of jokes in tabloids about how Fonda was racking up spouses. He often got cast in fatherly roles on screen, like in Fort Apache, he was the paternal figure to a cavalry outpost. Yet real life painted a starker picture. As much as the public admired him, it became impossible to ignore the cracks in his domestic facade. And then came Afdera Franchetti. In 1957, Fonda tied the knot with the glamorous Italian baroness, marking his fourth marriage. Cynics pounced on the serial groom angle. Was Fonda incapable of solitude? Or was he an old-school romantic who truly believed in the institution of marriage? The union to Franchetti ended in 1961, adding one more dissolution to his record. If that wasn't enough, he hopped right into a relationship with Shirley Adams, whom he married in 1965. She would remain by his side till the end. Through all these marital upheavals, Hollywood watchers scratched their heads. How could the man who played Lincoln so convincingly in Young Mr. Lincoln, 1939, the moral rock of so many dramas, be this restless, this elusive in personal commitments? Family drama didn't stop at romantic relationships. Henry's children, Jane and Peter, were forging paths in entertainment and activism. Jane Fonda blossomed into a star with 1960s hits like Cat Ballou, 1965, and Barbarella, 1968, while also emerging as a forceful voice against the Vietnam War. Then in 1972, she made her infamous trip to North Vietnam, a move that enraged many Americans. Dubbed Hanoi Jane, she was photographed sitting on an anti-aircraft gun used against U.S. planes. Patriotic outrage skyrocketed. How did Henry, the great American moralist, respond to his daughter's shocking protest? Publicly, he said next to nothing. Privately, he was furious, but that anger simmered behind a silent wall. Many Americans expected Fonda to denounce Jane's actions, perhaps to preserve the patriot persona he'd cultivated. His refusal to do so, combined with his refusal to wholeheartedly support her, left nearly everyone disappointed. This father-daughter standoff became a microcosm of the generational chasm in American culture. Jane later described her father as emotionally shut off, a man of granite silence who'd rather brood than argue. That episode hardened the sense that the Fonda family, behind its veneer of artistry and fame, was riven by complexities typical families might find all too relatable. A father not sure how to support or condemn, a daughter demanding moral clarity, and a public devouring the drama. During the 1960s and 1970s, fatherhood for Fonda was mostly overshadowed by his public persona as an established star, culminating in roles like 12 Angry Men, 1957, and Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968, in which he played a rare villain. Meanwhile, Jane's activism soared, and Peter launched his own acting career, Easy Rider, 1969. Henry's aloofness persisted. People on set described him as polite but distant. Home life apparently offered a similar vibe. Jane recounted in her memoirs that he rarely displayed warmth or open affection. That conversation felt stifled. Once, father and son tried bridging the gap by co-starring in Wanda, Nevada, 1979. The experience, rife with tension, only amplified how estranged they were. Peter wanted collaborative closeness, Henry wanted structure and minimal emotional confrontation. The public, already enthralled by Hanoi Jane, latched onto every sign of friction. For a man who'd spent decades playing fatherly heroes and moral guardians, it was an ironic twist. Real fatherhood seemed to be his Achilles heel. By the mid-1970s, Fonda's health began deteriorating. He was diagnosed with heart disease and had a pacemaker installed. Rumors circulated about possible prostate cancer as well, though not always confirmed. He soldiered on stoically. When he signed on for On Golden Pond, 1981, the film that would become his swan song, it was widely recognized that he was in frail shape. The role ironically mirrored elements of his own life. He played Norman Thayer, an elderly man grappling with mortality and an emotionally distant relationship with his daughter. That daughter in the film was portrayed by none other than Jane Fonda. The parallels between fiction and real life were almost too stark. On set, Katharine Hepburn marveled at how Fonda seemed to pour his real regrets and paternal awkwardness into the role, creating an authenticity that soared. He was ill, often exhausted, but determined to see the project through. The result was a performance brimming with a vulnerability we rarely glimpse from him. Critics lauded it as a career pinnacle. Audience members were moved to tears, many aware that father and daughter were working through real wounds behind the camera. When the film premiered, it struck gold, both at the box office and in award circles. The Academy awarded Henry Fonda the Best Actor Oscar for 1981's On Golden Pond. But the man who had played so many noble, fight for what's right characters was too ill to attend the ceremony. Instead, Jane stepped onto the stage, her voice trembling with emotion, to accept the statue on his behalf. That moment, broadcast live, became a cinematic milestone, a daughter's public gesture of love and honor for a father she had once clashed with so deeply. Her acceptance speech had the ring of both celebration and apology. She described him as an inspiration, a champion of authenticity, and ended with a vow that the trophy would be displayed at his bedside. In that single moment, the image of Henry Fonda as a cold, distant patriarch softened. The Oscar effectively served as a final grace note to his career, a testament to the complexities of a father-daughter bond battered by misunderstandings, yet anchored in love. In the final months of his life, Henry Fonda's health spiraled downward. He weighed just over 100 pounds at one point, seldom left the house, and needed constant medical care. Yet he remained stoic, refusing to dwell on mortality or dramatize his suffering. On August 12, 1982, he died peacefully in his Los Angeles home at 77. Shirley, his fifth wife, stood by him until the end, as did Jane, fulfilling a measure of closeness he'd evaded for so long. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from across the globe. Fellow actors spoke of his unwavering professionalism. Directors praised his moral presence on set. Fans recounted how his roles shaped their worldview. But Fonda had left a final directive: no public funeral, no grand memorial. True to that private, closed-off side of him, he asked that his remains be cremated and scattered without fanfare. So the world got no official farewell gathering, no red carpet tributes or star-studded eulogies. Instead, a hush fell, and his loved ones quietly honored his wishes. Thus ended the life of a cinematic icon, who, for all his portrayals of righteous men, wrestled with complicated truths in private. The father who hid the circumstances of his wife's suicide, the husband who remarried mere months after tragedy, the father to a famously radical daughter, and yet Also the man who gave us Tom Joad in The Grapes of Wrath, who gave voice to juror number 8 in 12 Angry Men, who tested the moral waters of the Old West in My Darling Clementine. Such dichotomies mark Henry Fonda's legacy, a warm presence in film, a perplexing figure off-screen. Decades after his passing, fans rewatch his movies for that earnest gaze, that quiet resolve, and rarely suspect the heartbreak, secrecy, and storms swirling behind those blue eyes. And that, in the end, is the essence of Henry Fonda. He was neither a total paragon nor a villain, but an actor whose screen presence etched itself into national consciousness. His final act on Golden Pond gave him the Oscar that had eluded him for decades, but more importantly, it gave him and Jane a stage to express a tenderness so long suppressed. The world got a glimpse of the sincere heart behind the stoic facade, and for once, father and daughter seemed to meet on equal terms. He died soon after, leaving us with a bittersweet sense of closure. Perhaps it was the best possible ending, culminating in an award that recognized his artistry and a film that allowed him to transcend the personal obstacles he could never quite defeat in real life. No public funeral, no final farewell thronged by fans. Henry Fonda slipped away in quiet, just as he had so often receded from emotional showdowns. Yet the resonance of his life story continues. Each time we watch Tom Joad deliver that stirring monologue in The Grapes of Wrath, or see juror number 8 stand against peer pressure in 12 Angry Men, or witness Norman Thayer's gentle acceptance of mortality in On Golden Pond, we catch echoes of a man struggling to reconcile private turmoil with public virtue. If that's not the very definition of captivating, what is? In that sense, Henry Fonda stands among the immortals of Hollywood, flawed, profoundly human, and forever compelling.